Hey, everybody. Welcome to Azure Flash News, episode 80.
Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. It is Friday today, and it is the 15th of November. So welcome. Glad you're here. As you see, Rick isn't here.
Tim.
This is Tim. Tim is one of the CSAs on the team here, so we're really glad to have Tim filling in. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Great, cool. So we have some really good news this week. Stuff has continued to come out post-Ignite. A couple of things. We'll talk a little bit about container registry, some really cool stuff at GitHub that I have actually used myself. We also have some announcements around reservations. Think reserved instance, but not. Kind of.
Yeah.
And then some stuff about Kubernetes and monitoring. And the last thing is kind of talking a little bit about how things have gone here at Microsoft.
Yeah.
So, we want to share those stories about our journey at Microsoft because, we've gone through some of the transformation that some of our customers are trying to go through, and we want to share that.
Yeah. And we're another large enterprise that's just had to go through the same experience that we're now asking you to go through. Too,
yeah.
so.
Well, I always tell people that I actually work in the business.
Yes.
Here at Microsoft.
Yeah.
It's kind of fun. So anyway, all right. Well, let's get to it. So the first one is
Azure Container Registry now has a preview for repository scope permissions. So for those of you who haven't used Azure Container Registry, it's a service very similar to Docker Hub, but it's meant more, I would say, for your enterprise to be able to have private repositories. You can use it for public repositories. I don't really see, or registries rather, I don't really see too many of my customers using it for the public repository side of things.
No.
But it lets you lock things down to your organization and to have that same Docker flow that you're used to with Docker Hub or something like that in your open source world.
Yeah.
But what we've started to introduce is repository scope permissions. And so with Azure Container Registry, what you have is one registry, which would be your namespace. Let's say a DNS record at I don't actually remember what it is. It's like something that
AzureCR.io.
Yeah.
I think so.
And so you'd have like Mark's registry AzureCR.io, and then you would have repositories for each of the container images that you're hosting in there. And so you can then take those containers and deploy them to Azure Container Instances, Kubernetes service, things along those lines.
Yeah.
What this is allowing you to do, though, is to have one registry with multiple repositories with different permissions on them.
Yeah, and I like to think of Azure Container Registry or repository as kind of like a folder, maybe.
Yeah,
like a sub-container.
Yeah.
Not container, but like sub. Like I'm using the word folder, so I'm not using the word container.
Yeah, no, I think that's an apt description. It's another segment in the logical structure of the registry.
So now you could think about having a single registry with lots of repositories.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the big blockers to that always was you can't have two repositories in there that have different permissions.
Yeah.
But now you can.
Well, and I think that they call out some really good use cases here. If you have IoT devices that are trying to pull a specific image, you could use this here to limit your IoT devices so that the blast radius of a potential compromise of one of those is very small.
It can only pull it's only able to pull from the repository it's supposed to pull from.
Yeah. Another one is providing an external organization with permissions to specific repositories. Now, I said that I don't usually see too many of my customers using it for public repositories or public registries, but there are a fair number of them that might want to be sharing these containers with their customers, and this would allow you to have a similar image but specific to your individual customers, and each of them could then access it out of one registry, simplifying your management process.
It's not public, but it's shared, which is kind of public. It's public, but it's secured.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So a little different. So a lot of really interesting stuff. And they kind of go into some additional detail about how we use Azure Active Directory to kind of map you to the correct stuff. And then, of course, just these awesome sketches. I don't even wish I could sketch like that, but pretty cool stuff. It kind of goes into some additional details as to kind of how these things work and how we help secure this stuff. So anyway, take a look when you get a chance. If you're using Azure Container Registry and you always kind of wish that there was this Azure Active Directory sub-authorization, there is now.
Well, and I think that's actually a great point too, Mark, is that this feature was driven by feedback.
Oh yeah, good point.
Given to our engineering team. So, they specifically called out, I think, that this was a top item on user voice for them. So you can know reading these articles that our engineering teams actually are looking at what you're putting out on user voice and voting on as an important feature. So just keep that in mind too. So if container registry isn't your thing, maybe there's another service that you want to provide some feedback on.
So go to user voice
Yeah.
and vote because it really does matter.
Yeah.
Like they really do care. So anyway, check out this article and you can kind of see that they actually talk a little bit about using user voice as a place to go get the top feedback item. So okay,
great.
All right, awesome. Yeah, and I guess one last thing. Well, I guess yeah, feedback. They also kind of talk a little bit about the roadmap of stuff coming, So check that out at the bottom of that article. We're a lot more. The product groups tend to be a lot more transparent.
Yeah.
And so like the roadmap is usually kind of like not a secret, not like it used to be. So some of these things you kind of know what's coming next. And so they publish what's coming next so they can get your feedback on what's coming next. Because they really, it's more important to make sure that we're delivering what customers need than it is to keep it a secret.
Yeah, absolutely.
So anyway, so go check that out.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is another big one. Users out there may or may not know that Microsoft closed an acquisition of GitHub a while back. It's been 6 months?
Was it that,
year?
I thought it was longer, but it could be just that short of a moment of time.
I don't really remember.
Yeah.
I'll be honest. But so GitHub is now a Microsoft property. We've made it really clear that we will not compromise GitHub's mission around open source. And I know there's a little bit of Microsoft history there, but Microsoft is a very different company than we were, 6 or 8 years ago.
Yep.
We're producing huge amounts of open source code because we believe in the power of open source and sharing code.
Yeah.
So anyway, so GitHub is coming out with some new capabilities. GitHub has always been really just a code repository. That was it.
Yeah.
And then plus, I guess you could also say it had, you could do releases and issues and, kind of that workflow, that kind of stuff. But now we've gotten into a thing called actions.
Yeah. Well, and so actions, in my perspective, I have not used it nearly as much as you have, but this is really a feature that's being offered that's very similar, in my opinion, to the pipelines that we have in Azure DevOps, but allowing you to use GitHub as a GitHub consumer that you're accustomed to GitHub, you're accustomed to using that, you might not have experience with DevOps, and now you have this native tool. You don't have to go out and either learn how to use Jenkins or Azure DevOps or Travis CI, whatever it is that you were thinking about using. Now you can do this natively in the platform.
Just to compare contrast a little bit. So, well, let's give an example of what an action might do. A GitHub action might, when you push code, perform some actions. Okay, so like it's event driven. So you push code, and then an action might be for a .NET guy like me. It'd be .NET restore, .NET build, and then I don't know. It might deploy the code somewhere or something.
Sure.
So these things run on either action hosted servers, on GitHub hosted action servers. In other words, GitHub servers, or you can even do it on your own custom server if you want. So in other words, if you want to build a virtual machine and install an agent, you can perform your actions on that server. So think, for an instance, like maybe you have some customized software that you need installed to do a build, something that's not supported in the public build agents. You can do that. Or if you just wanted to make sure and do it inside your 4 walls, you've got secrets in there. You just really would prefer to keep local. You can do that too. That's fine. But that's kind of what actions are. But let me tell you one of the big differences, at least I see so far. And if you disagree with me or think I'm wrong about this, please tweet me at mgarner. It's totally fine. I always reserve the right to be smarter tomorrow than I am today.
That's fair.
So I'm okay with being getting some feedback. But is that GitHub Actions, you'll notice they're not called pipelines because pipeline implies that it is a post-code check-in procedure.
That's an interesting.
GitHub Actions are just actions you can do. So in other words, you can kick off an action after a pull request, after an issue is filed, after anything. So it's not, which is a good abstraction to say, well, okay, yeah, we can do something after somebody pushes, but why not after somebody files an issue?
Yeah.
Why not? It's just another trigger. And so the other thing about GitHub Actions is that it's very command line driven. So think about all the things you might want to do in your pipeline being command line capabilities. So you might You might do a NuGet push, or you might do a .NET build, or you might do I don't know. I'm a .NET guy, so that's what I think of right off the bat. But so just think about kind of that way. It's all done in YAML.
Okay.
I don't know if they have a YAML.
I don't see a sample.
I don't see a sample here, but YAML is kind of the hot language for configuration.
Yeah.
So if you have a configuration file, it's a lot of times it's in YAML. So it's a lot like JSON. It's a little less
verbose.
Chatty. It's like XML was to JSON like JSON is to
That's a
YAML.
fair assessment. Yeah.
It's just a little bit more tightly put together. It's a little bit more like, it reminds me of Python because the indentation matters a lot. It like describes how it works.
Sure.
And so because of that, there's a little bit less code. But
so let me ask you this, Mark. Is it like Azure DevOps where when I'm building a pipeline, even the new YAML pipelines, and I go in to start building it, do I get that little assistant that I can click on?
Currently, you don't.
You don't.
Currently, you don't. So, but the thing is that it's not. It generalizes it a fair bit to just say that the task is just called run.
Okay.
And a run task is really just Bash or PowerShell or something like that, depending upon your language, depending upon your platform, because you can do your builds either on Windows or on Ubuntu.
Okay.
And so, like, if you just think in terms of command line, then you don't really need to. We're not hiding that from you. Like, so in Azure DevOps pipelines, like we have a lot of tasks that simplify things. Like we put a GUI on top of it.
Sure. Yeah.
So like you might have a NuGet push, and like and we've got some parameters, and we hide the fact that it's just a command line NuGet push.
Ah, I see what you're saying. Okay.
So you're just gonna write the command line, and so it's a little bit more direct, kind of like so it's not necessary.
Okay.
I don't know. I found it to be, I didn't have trouble with it.
Okay. Okay. Cool. Well, and I did notice from this article that we do have starter templates, and GitHub has all of their actions listed in a specific repo, which are linked from this this blog post. So if you're like me, maybe a little bit newer to GitHub Actions, that might be a good place to start to learn what you can do there.
Yeah. And you'll notice here, there's actually a lot of samples here, and you can check out different ways to use GitHub Actions, but honestly, I found it to be pretty intuitive.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, and it really just it sticks them in a special folder, so they're kind of like out of the way, which is kind of nice. And it's so nice to have your pipelines as code. So if you have an Azure DevOps background and you're used to the classic, what we now call the classic mode for Azure DevOps, the pipelines themselves weren't code. They weren't code artifacts.
Right.
It was just kind of a configuration thing as a part of Azure DevOps.
Yeah.
And that was fine, except it's even better if those pipelines are actually YAML files in your repository. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, like, as in you're like, huh? Try it and you'll see what I mean. Because if you move some code around and that affects the pipeline, now you can check in the code that moves it all around and the pipeline that references the new spot all at the same time.
Yep.
So that's just an example of why it makes a lot of sense to have your pipelines be code.
Yeah, absolutely, Mark, absolutely.
So check this out. It's really very straightforward to get going. So if you're using GitHub for open source or for private repositories, which you can also do, GitHub is so often associated with open source public repositories. That is not the only thing that GitHub does. You can run your enterprise code repositories on GitHub if you want.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So I don't know. Anything else?
I think that pretty much covers it.
Yeah. So go check it out. It's new. It's kind of the way we're going with GitHub, and we're going to keep expanding that.
Actually, one other thing though, I believe that it is free, right? So if I have my public repo and I'm doing open source stuff, I don't think I need to do anything. Which I mean, Azure DevOps, you could argue is similar, where it's also that way, but with GitHub, if I have an open source project, I can have multiple people contribute, and all of them could be using that same action. Whereas with DevOps, there's a licensing model and all that stuff.
Yeah, DevOps is kind of built to kind of like with sort of like enterprise private, like enterprise agreement, per person billing, that kind of stuff built in. GitHub is like sort of starts from the open source, providing a location for open source development first, and then sort of monetization on enterprise afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's just a little bit different way to think about it. So anyway, It's great. Go check it out. I think that if you're using GitHub, you'll really like it because it's a native capability on GitHub,
Absolutely.
and you don't need to build something else somewhere else.
Yeah, yeah. Another one that's near and dear to my heart. You know, I always like to talk about cost management when I come on the show. We now have 6 more services.
It's important.
It is very important, very important. We do have a lot of customers that is one of their primary concerns with cloud is that this is a new operating model, a new way of doing my financing. Well, we now have reservations for 6 new services, and what this allows you to do is to start to get a discount on your on-demand costs in exchange for helping us to do our capacity planning by committing to a long-term usage.
Yep.
And so now we are up to 16 services. I can't name them all off the top of my head.
Oh, come on.
But now 6 of the new ones that we have are Blob, Azure Database for MySQL, Azure Database for Postgres, Azure Database for MariaDB, Azure Data Explorer, and Premium SSD managed disks. And I would say that this is definitely something, if you're using any of these services, you
cool,
definitely want to look into this. So for instance, Blob Storage and ADLS Gen 2,
I was going to say
38% discount is what you can get up to.
And you said Blob, and I wanted to make sure that we said, and Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2.
Yes, which is built on top of the Blob primitives. But yes, so there you do get that discount on both of them. And so you can get up to 38% there. On the open source databases, 51% you can get up to by pre-purchasing reserved capacity. Data Explorer, this one is a little bit interesting to me. I'm not as familiar with Data Explorer, but there's a thing called markup costs, and so you do markup reserved capacity. Could you maybe explain what that is?
So the way Azure Data Explorer, well, just briefly in about 30 seconds, Azure Data Explorer, think of it like Splunk without the dashboards. Okay, so it's a database for semi-structured, structured-ish data. And the way you buy Azure Data Explorer, and by the way, if you've ever used App Insights or Azure Log Analytics,
you're using
Data Explorer.
Azure Sentinel is another one that's using
Azure Sentinel uses Log Analytics, which uses Data Explorer. So that language, that that KQL language, it's across these 4 or 5 different services. So it's super friendly. And from what I've heard from people that got started, they were like, wow, this is really powerful, really cool. So anyway, so Data Explorer, you buy it by the node. And when you buy it by the node, you say, I want 3 DS15 V2s, or 5 or whatever. So you pay for the compute, you pay your VM cost. Okay. And then what you do is then you buy basically the IP, and that is the markup. Right? Because we need the compute, but then of course, we're providing the service on top of the compute. So you get charged for the compute plus the service.
But I could do a reservation on that compute then if I'm provisioning that.
I actually don't know.
That's fair, because it does say that those are billed separately. I just didn't know that if that would count. Oh wait, you can also purchase reservations for virtual machines.
There you go. So there it is. So in other words, we have in this 2-mode model, you would say I need 5 DS15 V3s or V2s or whatever they are, and so you could get reservations on those VMs and get 30, 40, 50% off depending upon what your reservation is, and then say also the markup. You can also get this discount. What did I say? 30%. So excuse me. So which is a lot like if you've ever used Databricks. Databricks is the same way. You pay for the compute, and then you pay for Databricks DBUs, which is basically the Databricks cost.
Sure.
So anyway, so Azure Data Explorer markup, and then of course you can get the VMs as well. What else?
Premium SSDs. So if you're using a lot of IaaS still, and you are using a premium SSD, which is what we would recommend for your production workloads.
Yeah, it's kind of the standard these days.
So you might as well just get that discount on those as well. And it's worth noting that these are flexible. And so you can exchange and cancel those whenever your storage requirements change.
Yep, that's right. And so in general, the way our reservations work is there is a term, and you can walk away from your reservation if you want for 12% of the remaining term that's prorated, or you can roll it into another one.
Yeah.
And so as long as the new contract is of equal or greater value, then you can just cancel it, no additional charge. You just have to roll it into a new contract. So it's very flexible, especially given that we will just buy them back. And So go figure that out and see what it can do for you. But if you know for sure you have an Azure Data Explorer cluster that kind of runs all the time, like this is a total no-brainer.
Yeah. Now that being said, with a lot of these services and with most of our reservations, it's worth noting that unused or what we would call like wastage of a reservation doesn't carry over. And so when you're getting to this point, if you're not sure that you're going to run it all the time, it's worth talking to your Microsoft account team to say, hey, does this make sense for me? Because even say you're running it for 20 hours a day or something, you still might benefit by using a reservation instead of a different cost model. So.
Yeah, and it does significantly change the calculation on whether it's worth the operations cost to keep it going up and down and up and down and up and down.
Absolutely.
So in other words, like if you're only running it 3 or 4 hours a day, it's probably worth it for you to figure out how to automate the up and down. But if, like you said, if it's only quiet for 4 hours a day and you could turn it off, it may not be worth it. It may just be worth just saying, let's get a reservation, get the price as low as possible, and just move on to.
Yep, absolutely.
So pretty cool.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So observability is a word that is kind of like it's becoming a buzzword.
Oh, it's definitely a buzzword.
And so, like, just to like burst the bubble on the buzzword, it's just monitoring. That's all it is.
Yeah.
But the point is that it kind of puts a finer point on the fact that we need to be able to observe or monitor everything. And it's such an important input to the way we run today that we just have got to make it a priority.
And I do think that they do a great job in this post about actually clarifying why it is the way that you're saying. Is that in the past, when we provided software to you, so SharePoint or whatever it was, we defined what metrics you should probably care about.
Yeah.
We would tell you in your user guide or your sysadmin manual for that service what it was going to be like. Now you're taking these monoliths and you're breaking them into microservices and you're building these things yourself and orchestrating them yourself. And so you need to come up with a different model of how you're going to start to figure out what's going on here. There's no vendor that can come in and tell you exactly what you need to be monitoring. So that's where this observability concept comes into play.
And I think that it's Rick always talks about the ilities, and this instead of saying monitoring, it brings observability to the level of an ility, scalability, reliability, resiliency, whatever. Those kind of things are kind of tier 1 priorities that we say, well, how important it is that we have resiliency, or scalability. Is it important that we scale out, or is it more important that we have redundancy across 2 regions? So like those are all important, but we're going to elevate observability to level 1 to say, when we deploy this thing, we got to make sure we can observe it. We got to make sure we know what's going on inside of it. And so how important is that to us, and how are we going to design for it?
Yeah.
So so just be so specifically, this is about Kubernetes observability.
Yes. And you might have heard us talk a couple months ago about Prometheus being a thing that you can now just take your pods and point them to an Azure Monitor endpoint with your native Prometheus calls out, and Azure Monitor can start to ingest that in order to give you that observability. We also have all the out-of-the-box stuff for Kubernetes and for the actual container and then the underlying platform that you might care about. But
and for those of you who aren't Kubernetes or open source natives, you might not know what Grafana is, or I'm sorry, and Prometheus actually.
Yeah.
Prometheus. Prometheus is just in this way, it's an observability standard. Like, in other words, it's an API, or a standard makes it sound like it's NIST or something. It's not that. It's just like it's a way to make your applications observable, and it's something that Kubernetes already does and your pods can already do. It's really straightforward to do that. But what's new here, or what we started adding, is you can pipe your Prometheus metrics into Azure Monitor. And so that means that the higher level, or the greater observability that Prometheus brings, we bring basically a platform service that can pull that stuff in.
Yeah. And then, we also talk about how you can integrate this very easily with Grafana if you are a user of Grafana, to have a much more.
Let me show a picture of Grafana.
What's the word that I would like? It's prettier. It's a prettier visualization than you get out of Log Analytics or Azure Monitor.
Well, and it's like somebody took the time. It's an open source project to do really cool, neat, specific stuff, and a lot of times it's not surprising that the Azure platform is pretty good, can do lots of things, but there are still opportunities for people to write really great monitoring software that has really, something specific here, especially around containers.
Yeah.
And so you'll find that there are things that get even better around Grafana.
Yeah, and I mean, it's great what they're showing is how we integrate very well with this. So you can click back and forth from Azure Monitor to Grafana and go from one to the other to dive into KQL with log analytics and Azure Data Explorer underneath the covers to really get deep into what's going on with those containers at those particular moments that you're seeing those spikes in your graphs, things like that.
So if you are using Kubernetes,
yeah,
and especially AKS, and you're on Azure, you really need to check this out. You need to go and look. I know that this stuff has been around, having some level of monitoring for Azure of Kubernetes. It's come a long ways. And this is something I think is really important to remember about Microsoft, is that we're iterating so quickly on these things. You might take a look at the monitoring for Kubernetes and go, oh, that's pretty bare bones. And it's like, yeah, well, we could have waited until it was all done before we produced the product, but we didn't.
Yeah.
We gave you AKS, monitoring came later. It's actually getting quite good now as far as the native capabilities in Azure. Mm-hmm. So if you're doing it, you really need to go back and check it out because it's really quite good now.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so this is an internal story.
Yeah.
And I think that when I first started at Microsoft 8 years ago, like customers kind of didn't really want to hear about what we were doing inside. Like I had a customer actually tell me this once. They were like, I said, do you want to talk to our SAP admins to hear how we manage SAP? And this customer said, no, because I know you guys have special tools that you don't sell to us, that you guys just make it work on the inside. You have special things, and I know that you guys make it work, and I don't have access to that. And I was like, what? Like, you think that if we had special tools, we wouldn't sell them?
Yeah.
Anyway, so I think that was a little bit more of an attitude years ago that people kind of were like, I don't want to hear about Microsoft. I want to hear about real customers. I'm like, what are you talking about? We're a real customer. We have to deal with the same problems you do. So I think there's a new openness in saying, how can we share with you how to become more like Microsoft?
Exactly. And I think that, one of the great things about thinking about DevOps and about talking about Microsoft as a perhaps a guide or as a peer in this journey to DevOps yourself is, Satya always says that every company is a software company. And that is very true. You have to develop these competencies and how you're going to build your own solutions and how you're going to make these things work for your business to differentiate yourself in the modern world. And it's really interesting with how we publish these things because it takes a long time. And that's something that I don't think that people always realize. But you can go back and look. And I think that they started this like 5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah.
And we're now just getting to the point where we're feeling like really good about where we're at from a DevOps
Yeah,
perspective.
and it was really, I don't know if this is in here specifically, but from what I've read about this, it was very much a bottom-up movement. That people were like, really, we need to get started with, because Microsoft had been developing software sort of in a waterfall 3-year cycle for a long time. And shifting to iterative development was a big deal.
Yeah.
That was a big change for Microsoft. So just be aware that like we're going through these things. We've been going through it. We're happy to share with you. There's a lot of information about how we did it, how we structured our teams. And, so like if you are trying to become more of a software company, especially like I was going to add this about Satya. He says you're a software company. Well, you're a software company if you want to digitally transform.
That's right. Yeah.
If you're not interested in digital transforming, you may not need to become a software company.
That's true. That's very true. Yeah.
But anyway, so there's lots of really good information in here. Go back and check this out and see what you can learn because, you've got to be a constant learner. You have to be an open-minded person to learning, and you can take advantage of some of the journey we've already been through.
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. That's a great point.
So we are getting close to a half an hour, and we want to kind of keep it to that. We want to, kind of keep the show to that time frame to help you guys budget your time. And speaking of, we really appreciate you spending your time with us.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So don't forget, Tim. Where can people get you?
They can get me on LinkedIn. I am linkedin.com/TJSullivan1 or email sullivan.timothy@microsoft.com.
All right. You can catch me on Twitter @mgarner, or you can email me mgarner@microsoft.com. That's just fine. Or you can catch the show, if you will, at Azure Flash News on Twitter, and catch us there. And you can catch us on YouTube now,
Mhm.
iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and if there's somewhere we're missing, you let us know.
Well, and actually, one of the other things that I want to say is that you can also find the show on GitHub, which is where we put our show
Oh,
notes now.
yes, that's
And
right.
so instead of maybe tweeting you for feedback, you can go open an issue with this particular show,
Oh,
and people could then see other people's feedback in a more structured way.
I like
So
it. I
feel
like
free to
it.
try that out, guys.
Can have a little conversation.
Yeah.
You got an issue with the show? You got issues? You can open
File
up
them
and you
there.
can you can file your issue at GitHub. That's awesome. I love it. So I guess that's it for the show.
Yeah.
Um,
Thanks, Emily McMiller.
yeah, thanks to the producer, to our producer Emily McMiller. We really appreciate it, and thanks to the MTC
for hosting
here in Minneapolis for hosting us. We really appreciate that. And
as Rick would say,
yeah, keep your fingers on the keyboard
and your head
and
in
your
the
head in the
clouds.
clouds. Thanks, everybody. See ya.
Bye.